German. I wanted to be a theatre director. My mother was an actress. I knew the world of theatre quite well, and I wanted to be a theatre director. You can see I was pretty bossy even at 17. But it was very difficult. There was only one university in Britain then where you could do theatre directing. And my mother said, no, Susan. My father had died when I was 11, so we didn't have very much money. My mother said, no, Susan, you train to be a teacher, and then you'll always have a job, it's safe. What you actually go and do is up to you, but train to be a teacher, it's safe. So I went to the Central School of Speech and Drama, where quite a lot of famous actors came from, and I trained to be a teacher of drama and English for UK schools. And it was actually a very good training. I did lots of other things outside it, including doing some theatre directing. But it was a very good training because as part of the training, we had to go into London schools and observe. We had to go and watch classes, and then we had to do practice teaching with somebody to come and observe us. And we had to discuss the results. And it's the sort of thing that has remained with me, even after all those years. Some of the things I observed in classes, and I think it was then that I realised that it's the relationship between the teacher and the pupils that makes something successful or not successful. You know, some of the content from the lessons may have been really quite boring, but it was the people who could bring it to life and make it appropriate for those particular kids, adolescents, in that particular context. They were the ones who were successful and good teachers. So I think that observing is a very, very important part of teacher training. I think, now I don't know about you, but when I'm teaching, I don't particularly like somebody coming to observe me. I think there's something about one's classroom that it's your world. You close the door on the outside world, and then somebody comes in, and they're sitting there, and they're looking, and they're making notes. And, goodness, why did I do it that way? And so on. But if you can get over that, if you can find a colleague who you're sympathetic with, who you trust, and you can go and observe your colleagues' lessons, and the colleague can come and observe yours, and you can discuss it quite honestly, I think one can learn a huge amount. Because there are things you do when you're teaching, and you're not quite sure if it's working, and somebody else, another pair of eyes and ears on what's going on in the classroom, can be very useful. So I would encourage observing and discussing as much as you can. I think that very often teaching can feel quite an isolated job. You're there in your classroom, that's nice, but it can be quite lonely. And the more discussion you can have, it may be through teachers' groups, teachers' associations, or just quite informal in the staff room, or over a cup of coffee or something, the more you can exchange opinions and ideas and ask other people what they think, I think the more supported you can feel. So, I think when we're talking about teaching, we're also talking about learning. When we're talking about training, we're also talking about learning and teaching. All these things in the world of teacher education, education for language teaching, they all come together. You might at one point today be being a teacher, but maybe another day you'll be a teacher trainer. And all these things fit together. So, very important to know who your learners are. And as I said, they're not just intermediate, they're not just third year, they're people. And I think we need to ask ourselves, why are they learning English? And what do they want to get out of it? What does learning English now, in 2019, here in Lima, or wherever it is that you're teaching, what does it actually mean for a student? Does it mean doing something to pass an exam? Does it mean doing something to pass an exam so you can come to university? Does it mean if you're an older person who hasn't studied English at school, doing it because there are job opportunities? Because, for example, I think here in Lima, as I've noticed in the 48 hours that I've been here this time, you've got more tourists than I remember from the past. Just thinking about the hotel where I'm staying, I was looking at the other people at breakfast, and judging by what they were wearing, they were tourists. So interaction with tourists is possibly an important goal, an important something that students want to do. But that doesn't just mean interacting with native speakers of English like me, because the strange situation of English in the world is its role as an international language, a global language. And for me, that's got pluses and minuses. You know, the trees sometimes get in the way. I think, funnily enough, I was talking to somebody yesterday about this. I think Spanish is the other language that is global in the sense that there are many forms, varieties of Spanish, probably more than either French or German, I think, that Spanish and English used in different ways by different people as a means of communication. Now, if you're running a language institute, if you're writing textbooks, that can seem positive. You know, there are millions of people out there who are going to want to pay for courses or buy textbooks or whatever it might be. But when you actually come to the point of, well, what English, what type of English am I going to teach? Or if you're writing a textbook, what bit of English do I put in this textbook? You suddenly realise that English as a global language is actually much more difficult, because it's much more difficult now to say what is right and what is wrong, what is correct and what is not correct, because of that thing I waved at you, this thing. If you have, and the internet, if you have adolescents who are perfectly capable of communicating in English with people all over the world, who can go onto YouTube, Facebook and what have you, and use English, and can get over what it is that they want to say in a way that the people they're kind of talking to, that they're communicating with, can understand. What happens when the teacher goes in and says, what about the S on the first, on the end of the verb in the third person singular? What about the use of the present perfect tense? Incorrect. And the human reaction is to say, well, does it actually matter? You know, if I can talk to friends in another part of Peru or another country in the world using this language, surely that's success. I'm not suggesting that everybody thinks that through logically, but I think there is that feeling about how do we cope with the fact that in terms of communication, English is really important. But the question has to be, for anybody involved in education, which English? What type of English? And how do I get my students to feel enthusiastic about it and feel enthusiastic about improving their English without actually asking, what does that word improve mean? And I said I would give you lots of questions. That for me is one of the questions I think we all need to think about. And I think it might be getting harder in the future, not easier. So English is a global language. If we use English with people of other languages and other cultures, we're probably moving quite a long way from the English of the textbook. I mentioned that the need for English is growing because of this global English. A few years ago, I had an interesting experience in Brazil, where I was doing some work. Can you remember what happened in Brazil in the year 2014? World Cup, football, soccer. Okay? Now, when a country has the World Cup, have you had it? You haven't had it here in Peru? No, okay. Well, it causes chaos, so you don't need it. Um, various people in Brazil realise that if you have a big international thing, like a World Cup, it's going to attract people from all over the world. It's going to attract native speakers of English and people who speak other languages. And probably the language that they're going to use for communication will be English. This means that people who are driving taxis, working in bars, restaurants, hotels, working in shops, in shopping malls, are going to be exposed to using English in a way that wouldn't have been necessary without this event. And what the big teaching institute in Brazil, the Holden, realised, and the publisher I was being a consultant for, Macmillan, realised, was that there would be a need for materials, not for academic English, but what we call service English, for these people who are not academic, working in shops, working in stores, need to communicate. And they're not going to be communicating just with native speakers. So the cultural exchange is as important as the linguistic exchange. Now, I made a joke of the fact that when I come back to Peru, it's very nice to be greeted with a kiss and so on. Behaviour when you travel, and for any of you who travel to other countries, you probably know this, we don't realise how peculiar to our own culture a lot of our behaviour is. I mean, I said you're greeted with a kiss in Peru, you're greeted with about 100 kisses in Brazil, I think. And the joke in British people about going to France is that you can never remember, in Paris it's left, right, left, and is it 2 times or 3 times or what have you? Because one's instinct as a British person is to do that, very distant. We're changing a bit, but not. Now, if you're travelling as a tourist, okay, you want to feel comfortable in the place you go to. If your job is communicating with those tourists efficiently, making them feel good, then it's important that you know how to behave with them. If you're using English for business, globally, if you're working for an international company, which more and more people are doing now, you may need to use English with people in Japan through emails. You may need to talk to them on the phone or through Skype conferences. You may need to travel physically to meet them. And the cultural context in which the language is used is very, very important. And that's something that is missing, I think, from a lot of learning materials, teaching materials. Language is very often presented just as language, not within a cultural context. And that's one of the things when Vinny and I were talking about the book, we kept saying, but where are they learning? Where are they going to use it? What's going to be important? And I'll give you a couple of examples. I did some work a few years ago with a German publishing company. They were developing materials for Central and Eastern Europe. And they were very strong in German as a foreign language, but they hadn't done anything in English as a foreign language, so they asked me to help them with materials. And I would go every 2 months to a small city outside Munich, for meetings, progress meetings. And this is where I wished I had actually learned German at school. But they all spoke wonderful English, so I was lazy. I would meet them in the evening in a Weinstube, a sort of pub, and we would drink wine and beer. They drank a lot of beer. And it was all very relaxed and informal. It was Susan and Hans and I can't remember the other names, and so on and so forth. And I thought these are really nice people to work with, and we can communicate. The next morning, we would go to the meeting, and suddenly it was Doctor this, Professor this, Frau this, Herr this. And I remember the first time I thought, my goodness, have I done something wrong? Did I offend somebody last night? And then I said this to a colleague, sort of slightly jokingly, and he said, no, it's how we are. Outside the office, you can be friends, enemies, your people first. In the office, it's the hierarchy, and nobody would dream of using a first name to somebody who is their superior in an office environment. Now, you know, using names, saying, hello, I'm Susan, or good morning, what's your name? You know, that's kind of lesson 1, unit 1, lesson 1 of most textbooks. But if you put it in a context, it suddenly comes to life. And one of the things I sort of recommend, I suggest, is that you should try and think of, when you meet language in a textbook, try and look at the cultural context in terms of Peru, here. I mean, you have degrees of formality, informality in Spanish, which we don't have in English. It's different as all Latin languages do. And you will know from a Spanish point of view what is appropriate language to use in a particular context and what is not appropriate. Sometimes it's generational. You know, there are ways that somebody of a certain age will communicate with people of a similar age, which they would never use with somebody much older. I mean, very often I haven't a clue what adolescents are saying when they talk, but they sort of, you know, they adapt their English. So the context, the appropriacy, the level of formality is important. So is the body language. So are how direct you are. So is the use of first name, second name, title. This isn't just spoken English. I had a funny example last month. A friend of mine is acting as the editor for a series of methodology books for a publisher, and somebody is writing a book. He's a very good author. He's actually Polish. His English is very good. He's Polish. He writes very good emails. But this friend was telling me, hey, Susan, look at this. I had this perfectly friendly email from this author, and he signed it, and I won't say his name because his book might appear. He signed it, PhD. Now, which Doctor of Philosophy. He had put at the end of an email to a work colleague, in a sense, his university qualification. And I don't know if this would be acceptable or look strange here in Peru to my British, well, the friend is British too, to our British eyes, that look really odd. You don't tell people like the university qualifications. I mean, if you're applying for a job, yes, obviously you do, but not in a normal email. So the language of emails is really, really difficult. And yet, in a business context, you know, it's probably more common than picking up the phone and talking.